What if the future of a war wasn't decided on the battlefield, but in a closed-door meeting at the top of the world? On August 15, 2025, a high-stakes summit unfolded in Anchorage, Alaska, between U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. While the meeting ended without the immediate ceasefire deal Trump had sought, it sent shockwaves through the geopolitical landscape. Was this a bold step towards peace, or a diplomatic maneuver that left Ukraine and Europe on the sidelines? Welcome to the Global Blueprint. Today, we're unpacking why former UN diplomat Michael von der Schulenburg calls this Alaska summit a game changer. We'll explore how it could reshape global power, and critically, what it means for the fate of the war in Ukraine. To understand the significance of the Alaska summit, we first need to understand the core argument of a man who has spent over 34 years in the world's conflict zones, Michael von der Schulenburg. For him, the single most critical challenge of our time isn't about weapons or territory, it's about trust, or rather, the profound lack of it. Schulenburg posits that war is the absolute lowest point of trust, a state where people resort to killing because they cannot believe the other side won't harm them. He points to historical conflicts, like the brutal Iran-Iraq War, which dragged on for years even after the fighting was unsustainable, simply because neither side trusted the other to honor a negotiated peace. This crisis of trust, he argues, shaped earlier attempts at peace with Russia. Sources indicate that during his presidency, Trump made initial efforts to engage with Moscow, reportedly offering concessions like recognizing Crimea and opposing NATO expansion. But according to von der Schulenburg, these efforts failed because Putin fundamentally couldn't trust Trump to deliver on his promises. The primary reason? A lack of European buy-in. The prevailing European strategy at the time was to simply wait out Trump's presidency, signaling to Moscow that any deal could be undone. It's a stark reminder that trust isn't just about intent, it's about the credible power to follow through. Beyond trust, Schulenburg identifies another missing ingredient in modern geopolitics, the genuine effort to understand an opponent. He calls the current climate an absence of diplomacy, potentially more dangerous than the Cold War. His formula for diplomacy is deceptively simple: show respect, listen intently, and try to genuinely understand the other side's perspective. He stresses that understanding is not the same as agreeing, but it's a powerful tool to de-escalate aggression. Instead, he argues, we create cartoonish caricatures of adversaries, assuming they are driven only by internal belligerence rather than what they may see as legitimate security interests. This leads to what Schulenburg calls the most dangerous fuel for war: self-righteousness. He sees it as a strategic blind spot that actively prevents peace. He points directly at demands from the European Union, such as insisting on massive reparations from Russia, Russia ceding all disputed territories, and pushing relentlessly for Ukraine's entry into NATO, as prime examples. This rigid, uncompromising stance, he believes, makes Europe blind to workable solutions and incapable of negotiating peace, especially given his view that Russia, in fact, is winning the war. So, with that framework of trust, understanding, and the dangers of self-righteousness, let's turn to the Alaska summit itself. According to news reports, the meeting was held at a sprawling U.S. military base in Anchorage. Putin was greeted with a red carpet welcome, a gesture laden with symbolism, marking his first time on U.S. soil in over a decade. The timing was critical. The summit occurred at a moment when, according to some analysts, the Ukrainian military was facing the risk of collapse. In this context, Schulenburg controversially describes what he terms European adventurism. He points to discussions at the time about sending peacekeepers into Ukraine, talk of preparing for a potential war with Russia by 2029, and even chatter about conquering the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad. He labels these as potential acts of war that risk nuclear retaliation.
Schulenburg interprets the Alaska meeting as a decisive move by the United States to put a stop to this line of thinking. By meeting with Putin, Trump signaled that the U.S. would not support such European escalation, effectively leaving Europe to stand alone. In a striking reversal of the common narrative, Schulenburg observes that Trump, often painted as unpredictable, emerged from this situation looking more reasonable than European leaders who appeared to be, in his view, provoking a catastrophic conflict. The summit therefore served as a de facto recognition of Russia as a great world power, directly contradicting years of effort to diminish its geopolitical standing. The United States, through Trump's actions, was seen as receiving the winner, a standard diplomatic move after major conflicts to redraw the geopolitical map. Schulenburg argues that Europe's ambition to use the conflict to unite and become a great power itself has failed, even suggesting the EU could falter within years due to its policies. Looking at the immediate outcomes, one interesting detail highlighted by sources is that neither side brought their top military brass to the table. Schulenburg interprets this as a sign that the war was, in a sense, over, with discussions having moved beyond military minutiae to broader U.S.-Russia relations like the Arctic, space cooperation, and future arms control. But perhaps the most significant shift was in Trump's position on a ceasefire. Initially, he had been pushing for an immediate, unconditional halt to the fighting. After the 3-hour meeting, he appeared to drop that demand. Instead, he seemed to embrace Putin's preference for a broader peace agreement that addresses the root causes of the conflict. Putin himself stated after the meeting, "We're convinced that in order to make the settlement lasting and long-term, we need to eliminate all the primary roots, the primary causes of that conflict." This signals a potential recognition of Russia's core claims: a neutral Ukraine, protections for the Russian-speaking population, and guaranteed Russian access to the Black Sea. It implies that Russia is being allowed to continue its military operations until those broader terms are met, without facing sharp U.S. criticism. From Moscow's perspective, Putin got what he wanted without giving much away. Following the summit, Trump quickly reframed the responsibility for peace. In an interview, he stated, "Now it's really up to President Zelensky to get it done." This statement effectively shifts the immediate pressure onto Kiev and, by extension, Europe. It implies a U.S. military withdrawal from the conflict, leaving the Europeans unable to afford or effectively escalate the war, largely on their own. According to this analysis, Ukraine's options become severely limited. Schulenburg argues provocatively that Ukraine's only rational path is to negotiate first with the U.S., then with Russia. He contends that continuing the war risks the country's very survival, including the potential loss of strategic cities like Odessa. This perspective directly clashes with the prevailing European view that ceding territory to Russia is immoral. Schulenburg pushes back, asking a difficult counter-question. If Europe's hardline stance is prolonging the war and contributing to Ukraine's destruction, what are the true moral implications? This leads to a bleak picture for Europe's broader future. The attempt to isolate Russia, Schulenburg argues, has failed. Russia is welcomed in countries like India, and its economy has performed surprisingly well, while Europe appears to act against its own interests. He sees the continent facing economic decline, growing social problems, and an erosion of free speech as official government narratives dominate public discourse. He makes the huge claim that the West has lost two essential wars, the one in Ukraine and Israel's conflicts with Iran, Hamas, and Hezbollah, believing Iran may already possess nuclear weapons. This is all connected to a profound shift in global power. With 90% of the world's population being non-Western, and with economic blocs like BRICS now larger than the G7, Europe's threats of sanctions no longer carry the same weight. Schulenburg's ultimate outlook is stark. He describes Europe's future as potentially extremely bleak if it remains cut off from an Asian continent that is increasingly connecting through Russia. He champions a return to the basic principles of the UN Charter: non-interference and peaceful negotiation, arguing modern weaponry makes war an untenable solution to political conflicts. And so, we are left with a final, crucial question. In a world clearly shifting towards multiple poles of power, if Europe continues to cling to a unipolar moment that is past, engaging in what Schulenburg calls excessive militarism that undermines its own social fabric, what kinds of deep internal changes are necessary for it to find a sustainable, peaceful, and truly relevant path forward? The Alaska summit may not have produced a deal, but according to this analysis, it undeniably changed the game, leaving the world to grapple with its far-reaching consequences. Thank you for joining us on the Global Blueprint.